Star Trek Armada II is a game that I didn't really play that much when I was younger. When the game came out in November 2001, it pretty much passed me by. I was playing Star Trek Armada, Star Trek New Worlds. I was playing Star Wars Force Commander, Empire's Daughter Modern World, Empire Earth, many other games. And I have to say that I'm really enjoying playing Star Trek Armada 2. Even though when I played the demo, to be honest, I always thought the game was the ships were too brittle in the game. But now playing it on GOG, I think it's, honestly, compared to the first game, I think they're two different games. Star Trek Armada 1 is a much more tactical game. Star Trek Armada 2 is a much more strategic game, simply put, because there are planets in the game, metal, latinum, trading. All these things make the game a lot more strategic. Latinum trading is very important. It's essentially the gold of Star Trek Armada 2, which makes it, a game where essentially you're having to trade resources, and the game doesn't really. It is a more difficult game in a sense, because I just played a game as Federation versus the Cardassians, and it's on a two-player map. The one at the top, when you have the roster of maps to choose from, it's a map where there's essentially an asteroid field with a blue nebula, and then there's two planets on both sides, and there's a latinum, and there are two dilithium moons on both sides of this asteroid field. And it's not a very easy map to play on, simply put, because you have an M-class planet and you don't have anything else. And this is metal in this game. It's very tough to get. It takes a long while to get. The best way to get it is to get latinum and sell latinum or dilithium reserves and sell it in order to get metal. On maps that have more planets, it's easier to get metal, and therefore you have to spend less time with trading. Trading to get that metal. I have to say I do enjoy it in a way. It kind of reminds me of Civilization in a way, but in a more RTS manner. It's a very interesting game. I do wish that they hadn't made the ships so brittle, but I can understand that. In Star Trek Armada, the ships are very, very strong. Even the scout ship, Venture class for the Federation, and the other races. I mean, it's like the ships are much more brittle in Star Trek Armada 2. And originally when I played it, I didn't really like how this was being done. But now I'm starting to appreciate it in a sense, because Star Trek Armada is very slow-paced in comparison to this game. But however, I do really appreciate, you have to understand, in this day and age, people like to criticize many games, right? And I have to say, when it comes to the RTS genre, it seems to me that it has kind of, it's basically the same. I mean, you look at Age of Empires 4, which is probably the most recent AAA RTS, significant presence, I mean, there's literally 20 years literally almost 20 years between the Star Trek Armada 2 and our Age of Empires 4, and they're the same game in a sense. The structure is the same. If you compare Star Trek Armada 2 to Doom 2, these games are very different in many ways. The structures of the RTS are a lot more primitive and a lot more experimental in Doom 2. With Star Trek Armada 2, basically the RTS has been set. You can see exactly how it is. Lassoing, unit groups, resources, trading, all these things. Other things like kind of unique abilities, colonization of planets, other resources. It is a very interesting kind of way to look at how these games have basically stagnated in a sense. Like, the structure has been refined. I would say the only real innovation has really been the gameplay loop has been improved and refined, and there's more like variety in how games are played, in a sense that they're not just about destroying the other person's base. One annoying thing with Star Trek Armada 2 is if you have a big map, if you destroy the other person's star bases and stuff, you still have to hunt down every single unit they have. That's really annoying. But regardless of that, I think the game really does have, you know, a charm to it. It is a bit uglier than Star Trek Armada 1, which is to be expected considering it's a full 3D experience and not a pseudo 3D. It's understandable. It's at the time you needed to kind of save processing power, which is why the chips have muddier textures and whatnot, but that's okay. It's a very dynamic game in many ways. It is a game that originally I didn't really like, but I do enjoy now. And when it comes to older games such as this, I don't know. It's just that there's something about this game and other games around this time that they just have a. And people will, people who are cynical or people who, seek to dismiss the past for some reason, will say I'm looking at for rose-tinted glasses. Well, I don't agree with rose-tinted glasses. Every age will say that about the previous age. There are some things that were better, some things progress, some things do not. Some things stay the same. And those progressions may not be better in the long run, and those regressions may actually be better in a sense to help us build a better progression in the future. And that's really important, you remember. And I think that the reason why these games were better is simply put, the people making these games were making them for PC gamers. They weren't making them for consoles. And I don't want to insult console gamers, but console gamers have a tendency to focus essentially on games that are very pick up and play type games. They don't want something that gets in the way. And this is one of the reasons I love Starfield in many ways, because Starfield is a game that basically reminds me of what PC games used to be, instead of like everything having to adhere to consoles. I know Starfield released on Xbox, but Starfield very much is a game of a Daggerfall or whatever kind of mentality they had before consoles became far more important for some of these studios. And that's really why I enjoy it, because it has a kind of experimental, kind of just inhabit the world. Starfield is a game that has remarkable qualities, just like these Star Trek RTS games. And I would have to say, this is why I enjoy playing old games, and that's why I would recommend buying Star Trek Armada games. Simply put, to keep these games alive. And I think, Star Trek, is a franchise I've always enjoyed. Not recently. Most of the stuff now is pretty just, it's content. It's not a story. Content is different from a story. But it is an interesting game, and I appreciate they managed to make it. And it's unfortunate that this is really interesting, considering that Star Trek Armada 1 and Star Trek Armada 2 were basically separated by just a couple months, a year, and a couple months. That's it. And they didn't make a Star Trek Armada 3, 4, or 5, which is crazy when you think about it. Look at the Starfleet Command series, for example, which was also very popular. They pretty much stopped at 3. After 2003, pretty much Star Trek stopped making games that were actually of good quality. Now it's like a mobile game that keeps popping up in the ads. It's nothing like what it once was. And Star Wars is pretty much, compared to that, Star Wars' games are definitely not what they once were either. They're over-engineered and overly complex, and they have too much made by committee and not actually trying to make the game industry better. They're trying to appeal to a mentality that is just inherently not really about gaming, but more about ticking boxes. So I would have to say that Star Trek Armada definitely makes me think that older games are worth playing, no matter what people say, oh, because it's rose-tinted glasses. That's a cliche argument. There's always a nuance to it. A well-designed game is always going to be great. Master Orion 2, even by the standards of Star Trek Armada 2, looks like an ancient game that came out 100, 200 years ago, but it wasn't. Just 5 years. And yet it's still a great game. I enjoyed playing it a couple years ago. A great game will always be great, in my opinion, as long as it's well designed, and that's what people have to remember. So, that is just my opinion. Please go out and check out these games, and please enjoy playing playing. Thank you for listening to my video, and please remember to subscribe.